Well, I'm so excited to welcome my next guest because I wanted to think about this before I started, but it's been at least 10 years since I've known you.
Yes.
And in that time, I think one word that always comes to mind is classy. No matter what the situation, where we were, whatever, you just always had that class about you, and it draws people to you. So I want to welcome my next guest here, Judy Braatz.
Yes, thank you, Beth.
Welcome. So 10 years.
Yeah.
It has to be at least that long.
I know.
When I first started in business, like as a baby, which I would say was a long time ago, you were one of those introducers. That was kind of like your main role at the chamber and helping to connect people.
Yeah.
Tell me a little bit about that role. Like, what was it that drew you to that role? What did you love most about it?
I think exactly what you've just said, kind of being a connector, getting to meet so many small businesses. Like, I don't think our paths would have maybe crossed had it not been for that job and that career. But the other thing that I love about that job, I tell people, is I got the best of both worlds. I got to work with business people and then introduce them to our members, which were other business people. We had, just some really great times there. And you were so new in business.
Yeah,
so I loved
like
watching
20-ish.
you start. Yes, that's crazy. But I love watching you, and sometimes I just would have this feeling about certain people, like, oh, she's going to do what she said.
Yeah.
And then the next day I might be like, I'm not sure about that person. But it was just so that position was really everything that I looked for in a career. It had some flexibility. It was very community involved. Yeah, it was just so great.
It was your thing. Like, I feel like you were, very glowing. And I would remember coming, like, I was like, I'm just going to pretend like I know what I'm doing until I figure it out. But I would show up at chamber events, and at that point, this was still, I wouldn't say taboo, but awkward when we had such young professionals in the older atmosphere. And, would say, okay, well, let me introduce you. And it was like, okay, all right, I can do this a little while longer because now I have a little connection. So I think that was super empowering for me and something that I remember.
Because you know what I think people don't realize, and really I haven't met a lot of people that say, oh, I love walking into a place and networking. I mean, just like, okay, I'm going to go to this event or, a fundraiser. And really, everybody feels the same way. Mm-hmm. I know that I used to look at people and go, oh my gosh, they're so comfortable. And, I'll never get that way. But, in time you do. And for some people, it's just not going to ever be comfortable for them. But the reason you network or you go to an event is to meet other people. And that's why they're there.
Right.
Yeah. So I try to tell people, everybody's a little nervous.
That's so true.
Yeah. But everybody's there to meet other people.
Yes.
Yeah. So
that's absolutely true. So how did you get into that job? Like, what was your background? I know there's not a degree for being a connector, but it certainly is a talent of yours.
Thank you. Well, I've had so many jobs, I don't even know where to start. But I kid people that I went to a big college out east and played college basketball. And people insist on knowing what college, and I really don't want to admit that it's just east of Rochester, RCC, back then. But
perception.
Yeah, perception, that's right. Fake it till you make it. Mm-hmm. But so anyway, I've had lots of different careers. Now I forgot you wanted to know what?
What kind of got you into the path of being a connector and into that role?
I think it's maybe part of my personality too, in that I am comfortable, being around people. So the different jobs that I had, actually I started out as like a secretary or an assistant to Chuck Hazama, who was the executive director at the YMCA at the time. In my early, I think I was 19 or 20. And so I learned probably if one man taught me more about working with people, it was him. Yeah.
What stood out like that he taught that made such an impact?
I think the thing I take away from Chuck Hazama was he listened to his members. So I would, again, be at the counter, and I was doing shorthand letters for Chuck Hazama. I was reading. I was selling memberships. And one day I remember a man came in and he said, Judy, I need to talk to Chuck Hazama. I got this bill, and he just was really mad. I'm like, okay, I'll go get Chuck. So I go into Chuck's office. I said, Chuck, there's a man out here, and he's really upset. And Chuck's like, bring him in. I'm like, okay. So I bring this man in, and Chuck would shut the door. And about 10 minutes later, the guy'd come out, and his arms around Chuck Hazama. He's like, okay, I'll send you that check. And I said to Chuck, what do you do to people in there? And he said, I just listen. So, and he said there are members. They don't have to be here. So,
Right.
It's that customer of yours, in almost any product or industry, there's competition. So that customer's always got to be the most important thing.
Yeah.
So from an early age, I learned, how important that was from Chuck Hazama. And then I was a Mary Kay director for a long
That's
time.
right. I almost forgot about that.
Yes,
right.
I was selling those pink jars. And back then, there weren't maybe as many people, but it was really a wonderful opportunity. And so I was out selling and helping other women start their business. And during that, I kind of thought, gosh, I've been selling. I wonder what else I could do. And so I had told Chuck Hazama that I'd be looking for something additional to do with my Mary Kay business.
Sure.
And I got a call from Carl Cunningham from KWEB back then, which was the talk radio station. He said, Judy Holton, I'm looking for a female voice on the radio. And Chuck Hazama said to call you. I thought, am I being punked? And so anyway, I did the news then for a few years, like the 5 p.m., they called it drive time.
Okay.
Yeah, and did that along with my Mary Kay. But again, that was a very visible job, and they did a lot of events, so I would go to there. So just really at a young age, I was always interacting, it seems like, not sitting in an office working,
Right.
which is happening a little bit more than I, wanted to, but we'll
Yeah,
get through
right.
this.
Yeah, right.
And then from there, I did the Mary Kay for a long time. Then I became a stockbroker for a while, which,
Wow.
was...
A full-rounded person. you are.
That one was a little more challenging, but I tried that for almost 3 years and then landed at Manpower Temporary Services managing that company in the early 90s when temporary business was really soaring and
Sure.
taking off. So, but my job was to be out and about telling businesses about Manpower, and then the chamber happened. I was there for 24 years, and now I've been blessed with a new career at Think Bank. So it's just always, there's been that same thread that it's
Yes.
usually involving people, and so I've just learned. I think I'm nothing better than connecting to business people. So I like that being the connector and introducing people because
Yeah.
it's awkward sometimes for people.
Oh, for sure.
Yeah.
And I think that's a very specific role that anyone who gets you in that need of a role just hits the jackpot, because it is a very delicate type of conversation sometimes between people, and being able to read them and listen, to your point.
True.
Is a big one too. And I think that made it really successful at the chamber. I think as the chamber was growing in the, around that 2010, a lot of things were growing quickly in that time frame. And we had the fuel, was that what it?
Yes,
the
that's
young
right.
professionals. And I remember the women roundtable was one of the first things that I started going to, and that budded so many relationships, as well. Just again, people that you're still connected to, and it's always that ripple effect of circles that, you find people within these circles that you didn't know, but, that, what is it, 7 degrees of separation or whatever.
Yes. Yeah.
But I think it's so important. I think, as you kind of built that out, you could see the community of the women inside that chamber membership grow. What did that look like? Because traditionally there was a lot of men in the chamber. There was also, sort of the older Rochester in that, as these new young professionals started coming into the picture, it started to shift the dynamic a little bit.
Yeah.
What did that look like for you, and what did you see happen?
Yeah, that is so interesting that you zone in on that, because I was going to say in those years of working there, 2 things really I saw progressively change. Number one was more women-owned businesses were opening.
Yep.
That was probably more like the early 2010s in there after the 2008 2009. So a lot of women-owned businesses. And then I used to kid people, I must be getting older, because the business owner was getting younger and younger and younger. And I just don't think younger people back, say 25, 30, 40 years ago weren't taking some of those chances that young people are now.
Yeah.
Yeah. It was so exciting to see that change. And consequently, you had to take advantage of that membership and get involved. But, yeah.
It definitely was a choice, and I think, anyone who's been a part of any group can understand you have to participate to get the value in it. I think a lot of times we expect and assume things to happen for us rather than actually taking the action to do that. And, that's, in my opinion, a big mistake. And I think that's kind of where we get in that courage over comfort space, is people just assume someone else will handle it, or assume someone else will say something, or assume it'll get done or whatever, and I think growing a business, that's, at the baseline, you can't assume anything. You just have to take action and get out there and do that.
Yeah.
So,
and that was coming too. Some people would think, I'm going to start a business, and everybody's either going to come in my front door or they're going to call me.
Open it. If I open it, they will come,
yes,
right?
Yeah. And I'm like, oh, do you, so I said, I'm excited for you. But yeah, it's so much work. I totally respect people like you that have taken that step. Yeah. And that's something else I found consistent when I look back, because doing things like this makes me think back like, oh my gosh, how come I did that? But I think I stepped out of my comfort zone.
Yeah. And what was your comfort zone? What was stepping out? What did that look like to you?
Well, I mean, to anybody, we all have our comfort zones. It could be, going to work at Mayo Clinic every day is your comfort zone, but you're like, gosh, I really, really, really would like to own a bed and breakfast, or I'd really like, I think you have to somewhat have a plan. You can't, just say, I'm quitting this job and I'm going to go do this, unless you're financially sound. But stepping out of your comfort zone. I mean, I had never been on the radio. I had never written a news story. I didn't know how to interview people, and back then it was a microphone and a tape recorder,
right.
But I thought, I'm going to do this, I mean, Mary Kay, in a way, that was my own business, and that was a big step, so I stepped out, and I, was single at the time, and it was kind of a scary thing to do on my own, but that was a lot of fun too. So, and then to be a stockbroker, I didn't know what a stock or bond was before I went through all the training, and I passed that, exam. So that one was really, I was proud of that accomplishment. That was a hard thing to do.
I'm sure.
Yeah.
Anything in that realm would be.
So when this gentleman talked to me about that job, I just thought, there's no way. I don't know about the investments. But when he said, we'll train you, we'll teach you, you've got experience in sales. So had I not stepped out of my comfort zone, but
what fueled those changes? Like, I mean, I think for change in general is scary for a lot of people.
Yeah.
What fuels those changes? Like, I could take this, I could be on the radio, I could be a stockbroker, like for some people they'll have 800 reasons why they can't.
Yeah.
What came behind it and said, yeah, you can do this. You don't know anything about stocks, but that's fine,
Yeah, well, I always thought I can always learn about a product.
Sure.
I have to believe in it in order to sell it. So, but I guess too, I wasn't being fulfilled, or the job that I was in wasn't what I was meant to be in for the length of time that I, has been in some other ones. So I think that was, always maybe keeping my ear to the, sidewalk saying, what's going on out there? And so
being open to possibilities, I think that's a choice too.
Yeah, true. And because I know that I heard from a lot of people and women especially that said, oh my gosh, I'd like to move on from my job, but I can't, and so you have to be responsible and, maybe have a plan or, a goal or that kind of thing too. But sometimes doesn't always go the way you want it to.
Right.
Yeah.
Most things.
Yeah.
Yeah, I think plans are great and they'll keep steering you, but you use it as a compass, right? Like, you have to be able to not use it as a map necessarily and say it has to go just like this.
That's a good way to put that.
Because I know in my life I've had a lot of different roads.
I know.
And that's not how it worked out. But I think, going back to just kind of like what that environment was like, I felt like it was one place that made a big difference in where I grew because, who you surround yourself with makes a difference. And there was a lot of really great people that were encouraging people to level up and providing the opportunities to educate people. And if you took those opportunities, you could maximize, all of those things. And I felt like people were really open, most of the time about that. I'm sure there was a lot of politics. I don't recall that being like a huge thing.
Yeah.
But I was also 21, 22.
I know. But you were lucky to have those people around you like that.
There was it was, people that I still talk to, to this day that, have made a big difference. So that's, amazing. Like as we went through, I think when I first branched out and did makeup, I came back to the chamber, I was like, well, that's a natural thing to do, right? It worked really well from the first time. And I remember sitting down with you and we went through it, and I wasn't even necessarily looking at building this huge business out of it, but I just knew that you were the person to start with, and that, if I was going to continue making those connections, that was a really cool opportunity. Yeah. What happened with the chamber that, obviously we all experienced some different things and a lot of changes all at once, and I think that, without getting into all the details, like there was just things that happen in any organization.
Yeah.
That cause change. And I think when people's values, you talk a lot about kind of that core, like that you were looking for and you weren't fulfilled.
Yeah.
You were fulfilled for a long time there. Yeah.
And now for a quick break for you to think of someone you can encourage today. And now, back to the episode.
And then you had to make some decisions about what worked best for you. Like, what did that look like? And was there like a progression of what got hard or that made you feel differently?
Yeah. Yeah. Well, there was a change in leadership, which is kind of crazy when you think that one person can affect that many people. But it just
is so impactful.
Yeah. And so, I guess I just really couldn't put up with being treated that way anymore because I still loved what I was doing. But, there comes a point where you have to, be honest with yourself. And sometimes, I respect that I have a boss and that's the boss and there's certain things. But when it's not proper treatment and, and it was just a really uncomfortable time. And so that forced me to speak up after being fired. And did it take you a little bit to get to that? So, there had to have been a progression of time that you spent just sort of going through, like, what is happening right now? Because I know, like, we talked a little bit about this before, but when you're in situations that you're not used to, and thank God, but you're like, is this happening right now? Am I seeing this clearly? Is this just me? This is not what I had planned for my future.
Like, was there doubt on your side about, is this really what am I experiencing? Is this, am I overreacting? Well,
first of all, let me just say, everybody has gone through these. It's just, whether it's a marriage, it's a divorce, it's a job, it's diseases and illnesses. And, I oftentimes would remind myself, this is just a job, Judy. This is just a job, because there's so many other issues that could be so much more serious. But at the time it was, disappointing. But yes, I will say that, I was preparing. I never thought it would go to that extent. But, I just tell people sometimes documentation is important because sometimes it's hard to remember the great things that someone might say at work or some bad things. And so, that's
a great point.
Yeah. So I did that really thoroughly and, had met with people. So I knew that there's always two sides to every story.
Right.
So I just thought I just got to keep putting this forward. I still believed in the chamber and was still getting to meet amazing business people like you and others, So, but it was very challenging what was happening to all that. So that's all been resolved. But I learned from a little bit more about myself, saying that, geez, I'm not sure I knew exactly what all I was biting off, but I knew how I'd been treated was wrong.
Yeah.
And so, I took that step, and it's like, oh, wow. But it what? God had another plan for me. And at the time, I could not see what it was.
Yeah.
And, I'd pray hard, like, why is this happening? But he had another plan for me.
Right.
And, so I just was not to end up at the chamber. But you do have to dig pretty deep. And there were days when I'm like, oh, you're sad, you're mad, you're upset, you're tired. And
yeah, I think it's a whole, I was just kind of actually going through a thought process and writing something earlier about the stages of grief and looking at it as it plays out through this pandemic. But, you kind of go through that denial at first, like, I can't believe this is happening, you know, and then you kind of get into the anger part about it, and there's a sadness and all that other stuff that you kind of go through, and, especially when you're handling the emotional side of it, but then also, trying to be logical. I think the documentation was a great point. And one side note that I would say is that's why you get insurance, right? You make decisions about the insurance during the good times to protect the bad times, right?
Yeah.
So, but, with that, you go through all those changes. And, I think the hardest thing for me in having been in similar situations was, how do you retaliate, right, without the anger and emotion behind it? Yeah. How do you stand up for what's right and what you know to be true without making it an emotional thing? I mean, did that ever cross your mind? Was that something that you had to struggle with?
No, I didn't. No, when it all blew up,
Yeah.
I thought I just can't accept this.
Right.
And then, you turn to the experts that would have said to me, Judy, you really don't have any
leg to stand on.
any leg. Yeah, you have no leg to stand.
Right.
But had enough support from people. So, but like I say, it can be anybody listening to this that, I tell people, you don't know their story. You don't know why they're having a bad day. So, and I know people are getting through a lot more serious issues, but than losing that job. But at the time, it was, devastating. But
Yeah,
I see things that I experienced through that. Maybe speaking up helped other women. But I tell people you do have to kind of have a plan. So, like I said, I wasn't planning on having to lose the job, but yet I learned a lot, and I had, like you say, the documentation. So, and that's with good or bad stuff, because sometimes you'll say,
Right.
like, who's helped you in the, company, say, oh my gosh, I remember when Debbie helped me on, February 1st or something, because you wrote it down.
But you forget things so quickly.
You do.
I mean, regardless of what it is, like I have a journal that I write things in that, it's kind of like a diary, but it's just thoughts that come to my head, and sometimes I go back and I'm like, I didn't realize I was struggling so hard through that, or, just getting that different perspective, because even, ourselves, we have those perspectives, and I think it's great to bring the point to always look for both sides of that, because I agree there's, disagreement, hurt, things like that aren't fully understood, and that's usually a big miss of it.
Yeah.
However, there are certain things that should be stood up for and whatnot. Were you surprised by people's reaction, about what you did or chose to do, and maybe it wasn't as big in your mind as it appeared to be to maybe somebody else who's too afraid to make that decision?
Yeah. I mean, it got a little bigger than I certainly expected.
Right.
But the support was really what kept me so positive, knowing that I had done the right thing. And, of course, I had my family's support and friends. But, it surprised me how it just kept growing and growing. And there were so many other people being affected that also made it easier for me to speak up, because some others couldn't. So,
what would you tell someone that's been, wronged for whatever reason? I think there's a multitude of scales that you could look at, but, what would you give them? We talked a little bit about, well, I can't do it because of this, or I could never speak out about this. What advice would you give them, or even perspective to give them?
I know. Gosh, that's a good question. But, I guess, I think sometimes stepping back, like there's other times in my career where I'm like, oh, I do not agree with this, but you know what? This is not my call. So I've got to, deal with that and just move forward. So there was, of course, a lot of that going on, and that's in any job or family too, but I think you've got to learn sometimes, I can't fix this. I got to do it. And then you've got to let it go, because sometimes I don't want to give that person or that incident any more of my time or mind or feelings. So sometimes you got to learn, I just got to let this go. I got to let it, get it off my heart and let it and move on. So there's been a lot of that over the years, but also knowing in my heart that this was not right. Yeah. So I think sometimes you reach that point, and it had been building for 3 years, you know, so I had time to say, now I'm ready. And I wasn't ready to make that drastic step, but I had to speak up. Yeah.
Right.
So.
Well, and I think, like you look, again, as you go through those stages of like, is this happening? Like, go through the anger and the, all those pieces, you have to be able to step back for a second and say, okay, now I'm looking at all the evidence as it appears.
Yeah.
Are we ready to make a call about this?
And like I say, I didn't get to really make that decision, but
the action that you took was very, intentional in speaking up. I mean, that I think made a huge difference. Had that not been a conversation, I mean, do you think that it would have? I mean, maybe there's a lot of people that wouldn't have, heard a message that they maybe needed to hear, or.
Yeah, because I even heard from some male business owners that said, this is good for all of us to, make sure we're checking ourselves at work,
Right.
and it's hard because it's such a fine line, but looking back now, I'm like, gosh, I don't want to ever go through that again.
Right. And we're done with that.
Yeah, we're done with that. But again, things that I learned about myself and I grew, and maybe if it made one person aware at work, that's great, and changes had to be made here in the chamber too. So
I think that's great. And whatever those like events are, obviously we've been through a lot of different events recently with just things changing, and I joke around, I'm like, if this makes everyone wash their hands better and think about, the proximity to people and how things are passed, like, okay, like that's one thing we can take away from it,
Yeah.
Has it made, I know, working remotely, I've been working remotely, I think, as everyone has since March, and our team has experienced a lot more growth in terms of productivity and efficiency. We communicate a lot more. We have like an all video on policy that says, okay, we're going to be in our pajamas or hat, that's fine, but let's, make sure that we keep, interacting.
See each other, yes.
But, for good, bad, or, and of course we want to get back to the office, but, it changes your perspective. It says, okay, we're going to work a little bit differently, and we can, curve and get out of that comfort zone. A lot of people are like, oh, I hate video calls, or,
So do you look forward to going back in the office?
I don't know if I want to wear regular pants again. I've been in yoga pants for 3 months, and in all honesty, like, I really love the flexibility of, like, for me with 2 kids that are very active and just being busy in general, most of my life and frustration was around driving. Not the driving activity. It's like, how am I going to get this person here and this person here and this person fed? And, like, all of that, like, my drop off in the morning was 45 minutes and I live 10 minutes from work. So for me, it's like simplified life a lot, where my kid walks to the school behind him for, their summer program, and, I can just focus on work all day. I don't have to like worry about running around. So that's been helpful.
So
but, I think for a lot of people, it's like out of their comfort zone too. Like, how are we going to do banking? Like, what does banking look like? How is people's comfort level with their finances now being all electronic and video, and what does that do to people when they're talking about an already a little uncomfortable issue a lot of times?
Well, and Think has opened up our lobbies now, so there are people that just really enjoy doing their banking in the bank, rather than electronic. So we're glad to be opened, and they had to make lots of changes down there and stuff, so people are happy to be able to come back in. But I think people also found out, I don't have to go into the bank now that I've learned how to do this, online or through the
forced a lot of people, I'm sure, to learn new things.
Did
you have to learn new things to manage your job appropriately?
I kid my manager that I have never sat so much in my whole life, and I've never input so much into a computer, because it's just, I work with a team, so we have a database, and so every phone call, I said sometimes it takes me longer to enter what I've visited with somebody than it did the visit, but so that's been an adjustment, just the lack of events and that. But yesterday was our first kind of outing, and it was the Builders golf outing.
How'd that go?
Out at Summerby, really good, beautiful day, and
you can get out, distance. Yes. I feel like besides the fact that like the clubhouses couldn't operate quite as normally, that should be one thing that's like ramping up, is more golf tournaments this summer.
They are. Everybody's trying to get theirs in now. But and they had the dividers between each golfer on the carts, and we were kind of hosting a golf pong game, so that was out in the open. So it really, people were, and I could tell people were just happy to be out and seeing other people. So.
Did you go through any, stages of grief, like as your own personality is very vibrant with people and making those connections? Like, did it hurt to go virtual for all of this stuff and not have all that, interaction?
Well, yes, I mean, I miss that, but so does a million other people. But I was talking with our business customers. So every day I'd be like, oh my gosh, who am I going to talk to today? And, a lot of them were like, thank you for calling. I'm just, thanking them for being. So I've gotten to, I'm still talking to people every day, but it is different, not to be doing things in person. But
I think those reach outs are so important. I know I had like a list of people, like, and as I would scroll through Facebook and so-and-so's having trouble with this, or I don't know, just people that popped up. I'd write their name down, and then like every morning I'd go through and I'd message a couple of them just to be like,
great idea.
Hey, I'm thinking about you, just because I'm like, okay, how else can we make connections? Because I'm a person that like, I'll just get tunnel vision and I'll totally forget about everyone else,
Yeah.
So
Yeah.
I'm trying to be intentional about making those reach outs, but
I think they are important too at this time,
Yeah.
during this time too.
and you
so.
can't, again, assume people are all okay.
True.
Like, there's people that, like myself, I'm pretty forward and comfortable sharing things about anxiety and, like, mental illness, things like that.
Yeah.
But some people aren't. They're
No.
experiencing those things, like, by themselves. And, sometimes just a reach out can make a huge difference, too. You never know.
And now, a quick break for you to think about all the things you love in life, like Skittles. I love Skittles. And now, back to the episode.
Yeah, I said, I'm so glad my girls aren't in school. I didn't have to be a teacher. Oh my gosh, I don't know how you guys did that.
My kids didn't learn a whole lot from the book, I'll say that. Yeah. But we do. I mean, we did our own, like we had built a garden and, built stuff. Like, I redid like my whole house during this time.
Yeah.
So we did a lot of like hands-on learning. And I think, at the end of the day, it was like whatever you could do to help everyone get through it, because if they did or didn't learn something in that 12-week time frame, it's not going to kill them.
Right.
But
Right.
if their mental health suffered, if we completely just assumed that everything was fine, or even checking in on homework, whatever, we all had to check in on each other. We were all like at each other's throats some days, then we were all like separated some days. I mean, you had to just deal with whatever it was, but you had to keep choosing.
Yes.
To move through it. Like,
That's what I think. I say, take advantage of this downtime because it probably won't happen again,
Right.
So, but I'm looking forward to some of the boundaries being, a little bit wider. But it's just, it's a crazy time. Mm-hmm. Yeah, very challenging. And, of course, it's heartbreaking when you talk to some of these businesses and,
oh, I know.
So yeah.
What would be your like piece of advice for people, like, in those moments where you feel uncomfortable, in those moments that you feel not quite ready? What kind of advice would you give people to move forward, to take that step, to get out of their comfort zone?
Yeah. I think I probably have never taken one of these steps alone, so that close family member or a friend.
Yeah.
Because sometimes, and I'm guilty of it, I can like think things in my head like, I think this text meant this. And that's not what it meant. I read it, I'm like, oh no, they had what,
Yeah.
So I think sometimes until you say what you're thinking out loud or to somebody else that maybe, and again, you've got to be somebody you can trust.
Yes.
And respect their opinion, because sometimes they didn't like what feedback you'd get back.
Wise
but they're
counsel.
Wise counsel's good. But then, I think to, again, not act without some thinking. I mean, we all probably known somebody that says, I quit my job today, I just can't put up with it, well.
React.
And yes.
Yeah.
Really good point. So, so I think I've always been kind of a little bit of that, a planner, a little bit prepared, for what I'm going into. But, and then, to just really, if you're not happy with where you're at, then maybe it's only you that can make those changes, you know. So you've got to find that courage to change careers, get out of a terrible relationship or whatever, you know. But I think maybe sharing it with somebody, or even then, if it's something that needs an attorney, it might be worth those kind of things. But if it's just some life changes, life's too short.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I think the counsel thing is a very wise thing, and I don't mean put it out on Facebook. I do that too sometimes if I'm saying like, who's tried this or what have you, and just a little bit of bigger crowdsourcing for information.
Yes.
Just if I'm gonna look at buying something new or what have you.
Right.
But about when people ask for personal advice, on Facebook, I'm like, I don't know.
Yeah.
I think sometimes it's a good way to like reach out to people, but I think wise counsel is really important because you need somebody to help logically walk you through that rather than, I hate him too,
I know.
take him down.
Yes.
Right.
Or they're saying, I don't really see that that was done intentionally, or I don't really see your side on that one, So then you can step back and say, oh gosh, I'm blowing this out of proportion, or you know what, maybe I was at fault too. So.
Right. Which is a hard pill to swallow for anyone.
I know. Oh my gosh.
None of us like doing that at all, especially when it's like our kids or husbands or whatever, when you're like,
But by sharing or I've stopped some things that I thought maybe because I hadn't maybe looked at the bigger picture. Yeah. So probably saved me from something mistakes or maybe other things. But yeah. But I also I just believe sometimes things are meant to happen, and if you're not receptive to that and take a chance, you'll never know either.
That's a huge thing. How do you think that you would explain being receptive? What does that look like to you?
I think it's just part of my personality too. Is
open to change.
Yeah, and really, I really am not really open to change. I was in the same job for over 24 years. It's like I did the same thing every day. But I think all those personality tests you've taken over the years. It's funny how it's pretty all consistent. But I am one to not really like change, but I also know that now at my stage in working, I need to look to people like you, the younger, that we're learning so much from. Yeah. So I got to remember where I'm at. Now I'm up on that scale looking down like, oh yeah, you guys have all that experience. So yeah.
Even just a few years south of my age group, they're very involved and engaged in a different frame of thinking, but I think it brings a lot to the table, and just being open to other ideas is the biggest thing. I had a conversation with my daughter the other day who refused to let me help her with this project, and I admire that she wants to go figure it out herself, but I was like, okay, can I just suggest an alternative when it didn't work out properly, because I knew it wouldn't, not because she couldn't do something, but just the logistics of how she was putting it together wouldn't work. But, I'm I had to come at it differently and say, okay, I have a suggestion. You can take it or leave it. Just here it is. But, I find myself having to do that same thing with her when she says, well, Mom, it could be this. Can we just take a look at it? And trying to figure out that exchange and just say, okay, I'll be open to looking at this idea.
Yeah, I did that too. I think it might be a little bit of a control thing. With my daughter would be painting something, I'd be like, oh, here, you need some more yellow. And she's like, Mom, this is mine. I'm like, okay, yeah, you're right.
Yep, I know. So those boundaries.
Yeah, so it might be more of some personality traits too, but anybody can learn to do that kind of stuff too. But
any dog can learn a new trick, right?
That's right. You're never
Any
too
other
old.
Things that you wanted to share with us today, Judy, while you're here?
I just, no, thanks. This has been fun. I'm proud of you doing this too.
Oh,
so
thank you.
It doesn't surprise me though. You have just always been one that I know gets things done, and so I totally respect you too.
Well, I appreciate that so much. Yeah. My classy friend, Judy, thank you so much. If we want to get a hold of you, you can check you out on Facebook.
Yes. Yep.
Or come to Think Bank.
Yeah. Well, yeah, you have to find me, but definitely on Facebook.
You'll always find her dressed up with some classy shoes. I will say that for sure. But I so appreciate your time and just your courage on coming on here and sharing this with us. So
thank you so much.
Thank you.
Yes, thank you.